Welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. Today, I'm speaking with Andrea Morris and her experience moving from the United States to Australia. Her experience as an expat, the pros and cons of living in the US and living in Australia, and how living abroad changes you. Andrea is the executive manager of the foundation for the Emmy Monash Foundation. Enjoy. We have met each other in Maryland, and I am now in Florida, and you are now in Australia. Where are you?
So I recently moved to suburban Melbourne. Americans call it Melbourne, but Australians call it Melbourne.
Okay.
And it's the second largest city, or first, depending on the year. Sydney and Melbourne are rivals. But I didn't live here originally. I moved to Australia in 2019, and I was recruited by the Australian National University in Canberra, which is the national capital. Lots of people don't know of Canberra. It's a very small city. So I landed there in 2019 for the ANU. And after about 4.5 years, I ended up transitioning to Melbourne, which was basically 4 months ago. So I'm new to this city, but I've been in Australia 5 years.
That's amazing. And had you been to Australia prior to moving there?
Yes, I actually had two foreshadowings that I would end up in Australia dating back to 1974. So
Wow.
it's really incredible. So my parents visited Australia in 1970, actually 1975, February, and I didn't get brought along. I was with my aunt and uncle for they went by themselves for 2 weeks. And whilst they were here in Australia, they bought some indigenous Aboriginal art. They bought koala bears, up koalas. I'm not allowed to call them bears. They're marsupials. I've learned that lesson. They bought books, so I was exposed to Australia as a child with toys that my parents had brought me back, as well as art that hung on the wall in my parents' house.
Yeah.
And so I really always had an understanding of Australia from that experience. And then fast forward a decade into 1983, I moved to Dayton, Ohio. My dad was in the United States Air Force. And my neighbor and my best friend in Dayton had an Australian mother. So her mother and her dad had met in London. She was Australian. He was an American Air Force officer. They fell in love, got married, had their daughter, ended up in Dayton, Ohio. And I became good friends with her. And so her mother would constantly say things like, "This is not my destiny. I'm meant to be in Australia." Like she'd say, "Oh, Andrea, you're full of rubbish." Or, and she'd make pavlova at Christmas. And my friend would come to Australia to visit her grandparents, and she, would bring back toys and snacks and things for us back in Dayton, Ohio. And then she basically was told when she was about 15 or 16 years old that when her dad retired from the Air Force, they were moving to Australia. And she had mixed feelings about this, but she ended up moving. So in 1986, she moved to Melbourne. And this was before internet. I mean, really, we wrote letters. We called each other once a year on our birthdays, long distance. And she effectively invited me. She said, "Andy, please come visit me." And I said, "Australia, I'd love to visit you." Well, my grandparents and my parents bought me a flight to visit her in 1990, my senior year of university. So I came to Australia in December of 1990. I spent a week in Sydney and 2 weeks in Melbourne with her family. And we toured all around the city. I got my picture taken with a koala. And it was incredible. And I remember thinking, I could live here. This place is amazing. And I was in quick digression. So everyone in Sydney had told me to go to Darling Harbour, which was this new fancy shopping district on the harbor. And I paid like an enormous amount of money to take a taxi there because it was so important that I go there. I walk in, and I'm like, wait a minute, I feel like I've been here before. And then I see on the sign, owned and managed by the Rouse Corporation.
No way. Oh my gosh.
It was Baltimore Inner Harbor, basically transported. They are sisters. The Baltimore Inner Harbor and Darling Harbor in Sydney are identical.
This was made. So, this was like meant to be. Like this was.
I know it was bizarre. So I'm looking around like, oh my gosh, I've been here before.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they're both being redeveloped in this day and age. So that's the digression. But I remember it when I was in Darling Harbor, I met a guy working in a cafe, and he had an American accent, or so I thought. And I said, "Oh my gosh, how'd you get a job here? How did you end up here?
Yeah.
I want to live here." And he's like, "You're a Yank. You'll never get in here." And I said, "What?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "I'm Canadian. We're in the Commonwealth. You can't come here. Like, Americans aren't given working rights in this country. You have to be in the Commonwealth." And this is at the tail end of the White Australia policy, which is a whole other can of worms, probably for another day. But basically, Canadians and British people were considered, the ideal for who they wanted in the country. Americans, because we're not in the Commonwealth, we were in the other category. So I basically came home in 1990 and was like, "Look, I'm never going to end up in Australia." I did a little bit of homework. I was like, "Yeah, it's not going to work." I stayed in touch with my friend Sharon, my Australian friend. And then fast forward, the teens, I'm at University of Maryland College Park for a decade. I started hosting exchange students. In 2016, there was a catastrophic election in the United States. You might remember it. It's trying to happen again.
Yeah, what was that? What happened in
Yeah.
2016?
Well, I was living in suburban Washington, D.C. by this point. I'd long left Ohio, and I had graduated with my master's degree from University of Maryland. So I was incredibly loyal to my home state and to my university there. And I'd never really thought about living abroad, or, I always thought maybe I'd be join the Peace Corps when I was younger, but I only speak English, so I'm limited. And so Trump got elected. And for those of us who lived in the Washington, D.C. metro area, it was a front row seat to a train wreck. And it was not just a slow motion train wreck, it was a fast motion one. It was every day some horrible thing was happening. People were crying at work because their research had been basically deleted off the hard drives because it was climate science. Gay and lesbian friends were terrified. It was just a nightmare. And so I had been hosting exchange students, and I thought maybe I'd live abroad. Maybe I could get a project, in Europe, because I had connections in Europe because of my exchange students. So I actually interviewed at the University of Helsinki in Finland because I had a connection there. And they were just beginning fundraising or advancement work, which is what I do. And they were like, "Oh, we could really use someone like you around here. Oh, do you speak Finnish or Swedish?" And I said, "Well, no." And they said, "Oh, we thought you might because you had these connections here."
Right.
I'm like, "No, I don't." They're like, "Yeah, we can't have, you can't work here if you don't speak Swedish or Finnish." Right. So that was the end of my University of Helsinki career. And my friend was like, my exchange daughter's mother, she was like, "Andy, like, the winters here are terrible. Like, I can't see you here. You love it in July. Of course you do." So that was good advice. I don't really like winter, and Finland is quite cold. So I thought, okay, maybe the UK, I speak English, and I knew that they had a pretty good philanthropy programs in Britain. So I started looking. I had some connections in the National Museum, in London, which is world class. And so I'm doing all this exploratory work in the UK. And then someone from the Australian National University called me. Like, Amazing. You can't make this up.
Yeah.
So I was working, and I got a call from a recruiter that ANU was hiring 5 positions in the equivalent role that I had at Maryland. And I was like, "Really?" I said, "After all these years, you call me, and I was knocking on your door in the 90s. So I applied for one of the 5 positions, and they called me back 2 weeks later, and they said, "How serious are you about moving to Australia?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'm serious. Am I serious?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Because you've been shortlisted for 2 out of the 5, and you could get one of these. And if you aren't serious, you should withdraw. Don't waste our time." And I said, so I talked to them. I said, "Let me talk. I'll call back tomorrow." This is an American-based recruiter. So I sat down the family. It was all very existential until this minute. Like, I was like, "Okay, everybody, like, I've been shortlisted. Like, we could actually move to Australia." And my husband was like, "Andy, I'll follow you anywhere. Sounds like a grand adventure. Let's do it." So, husband was fine. My son, who was graduating from College Park in 2019, so this would have been 2018, the year before he graduated. He's like, "Look, I'm getting ready to graduate. I can do a gap year. Maybe I could get a job there." Like, "Yeah, let's do it. I'd go."
Yeah.
He was 21 at the time. My daughter, who was 16, going to be a senior at in high school in Maryland, she was like, "Wow, well, I have to finish high school." And I said, "Well, you could stay here, and Dad could be, it's going to take a while for this kind of a transition. So you could finish high school and then go to university at ANU. How do you feel about that?" She says, well, there are top 10 in archaeology, and that's my major. Um, I said, well, you have to get in. You have to earn your way in. It's a world-class university. It's like
Right.
the only university on earth with a Nobel Prize winner as a leader. I said, this is, it's like the Harvard or the Oxford of Australia.
Yeah.
And so we were all in at that point. So I interviewed, and it was interesting. I should have seen challenges. Like I was doing a half-hour interview, on Zoom before Zoom was trendy,
Yeah.
and talking to this panel, and they're, asking me like, what would you do in the first 90 days? And I said, oh, get meetings with emeriti professors and hear about important alumni that they know and are in touch with. And they're like, oh, and they're writing this stuff down. I'm just like, whoa,
That's a great idea.
And but there was lots of things that I would be like, yeah, that's kind of standard operating procedure.
Right, right.
And and so the woman that ended up hiring me, she was in the panel. She was the dean of the College of Arts and Social Sciences, which was my number one choice. She's a world class historian and just incredible feminist. I just adore her. And so I didn't really interact with her much because it was a panel and I was on Zoom. So I had just seen her in the room. Well, the Zoom ended and she turned to the HR lady and was like, I want her. Let's close this. She told me this later. So
Wow.
the next day, I get a phone call from the recruiter. Can you get to Australia next week? And I'm like, next week? So this was the Friday
Wow.
morning in December of 2018. And she said, yeah, we'll get arrangements for you to fly. We'll be in touch early next week. And I said, okay, that sounds good. I said, I could take leave. I have tons of leave.
Yeah.
So I had basically so Monday morning, I wake up at like 6:30 in the morning. I open my email. I have a flight that day at 3:30 out of Dulles.
That
Like,
day. Wow.
out of Dulles. I live in Glenburnie.
Yeah.
That's like a 2-hour drive.
Oh my
So then
gosh.
I called my son. I said, Drew, you're gonna have to drive me to Dulles. So I call out work for a week, and my bosses were like, okay, like, well, see, are you all
Yeah.
right? I'm like, I'm fine. I just need time. So I end up getting on the flight. It's winter. It's December. 20 hours later, via San Francisco, I land in CBD, Sydney, then I end up in Canberra. I get off the plane. It's probably 80 degrees, 85 degrees. It's the middle of summer. It's summer. And I'm walking around a city I've never been to in Australia in summer, 20 hours after I left winter. And I'm like, what the actual am I
Yeah.
doing here?
Yeah.
Then I interviewed and they gave me a day to explore the city. And one of the Canadian guys was like, Andrea, you should really rent a car. They say hire. You should hire a car and
Yeah.
drive out to the nature area. There's koalas out there and roos and things. So I rent a car and I drive on the wrong side of the road for the very first time in my life to go see the nature area. Of course, I'm not going to miss that. Long story, even longer. Basically, I ended up going home via Sydney. My flight in Sydney got canceled because of a cyclone, so I ended up staying there an extra day. I go down to the Opera House. I do the whole Sydney downtown thing. Get on an airplane, land at because you gain time. You leave. You arrive before you leave. So I get home on Sunday at like 2 in the afternoon. I go to bed. I wake up the next morning and go to work. And at the College Park, it's winter again.
Yeah.
I still my head was absolutely spinning. So that was Monday. Tuesday they call me. I had the job. It was just a complete whirlwind.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I ended up taking 10 months to physically get there because of the visa process, because I'm
Yeah.
not in the Commonwealth. And it was a very big ordeal. So I finally got there in October of 19, and next thing you know, it was bushfires. They call it Black Summer of 2019, 2020. So, worst air quality, hailstorms, terrible bushfires, devastation. I mean, I'll never forget it. And then March 2020, COVID.
Yeah.
And so I could go on about that time, but I have to say I can't even fathom it, even talking about it. Like, how did I get through this crazy period
Yeah.
on the other side of the world?
When you started to explore, maybe Helsinki, maybe the UK, had you talked to your family about it at that point? Was that something that you had always been interested in, or how did that come about with your family?
Well, it's interesting. It literally happened the day after the Women's March.
Mm,
So January 22nd, like inauguration of
yeah.
Trump, 2017. I walked into the house after having gone down to the march with my daughter and my student from Finland. I had an exchange student with me at the time. And it was they were very excited by the energy and they felt like, fight the power. And I was
Yeah.
really proud of the girls, but I had a sense of doom that was unbearable. Like
Yeah.
I saw the writing on the wall. I'd been in DC for 25 years. I'd seen the transition to Bush and Obama, so I kind of knew like I had been through that process and this
Yeah.
was way worse. Like there
Yeah.
was something in the air that day. So I literally walked in the door and I said, we need an exit strategy
Hmm.
now because it's going to take us a while to get out of here. And my family was like, this is a little alarmist. And I'm like, I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
So I called my dad and I said, how far back are we eligible through immigration? He's like, Annie, potato famine was 1848. Like the Irish is pretty far
Yeah.
back. And the Ukrainian side, I don't think you want to go to Ukraine. This is even
Yeah.
before the invasion. He's like, yeah, I'm not thinking you're getting out on those
On
merits,
those terms. Yeah.
on
Yeah.
those terms. Like, Canada was already being like, don't come up here,
Yeah.
and I really had no relationships in Canada. So I was really looking like, where would I go? Who would want a fundraiser? Who would
Right.
want one? And I could get by in Spanish. But I love Mexico. I had thought about maybe South America, but I felt like the university world and the high end philanthropy world, European was where I thought I'd end up.
Yeah.
And most people speak English in Europe. So,
Yeah.
but it was really out of 17, that we'd had the exchange students. We traveled to Europe, visiting our girls' families. So I was an AFS mom,
Yeah.
American Field Service, for 5 years. I had 5 students, 1 a year for 5 years. So I had good relationships in Europe. I still do, actually. I was just in Finland last year, earlier this year. But, I maintain these friendships are valuable. But I really decided, an English speaking country would be most logical. And when I ended up in Australia, and this was erroneous. I warn anyone coming here. It's almost like it's like a reflection of the United States, but it's not the same. Like
Right.
it's incredibly British, which, those of us who gave up the king in 1776, it's hard to be under a monarchy. And it comes up in weird ways, like the royal this, the royal that. And when the queen died, we got a day off. It
Yeah.
was a public holiday, so we got day off work for that. And then of course there's American stuff too. Like McDonald's is here, and there's a definite surfer vibe and
Mm,
California vibe. Hawaii is everyone's been there because it's pretty close, and they love going
right.
to the United States. They use dollars here; they're less valuable, but there's American feel. They
Yeah.
don't use pounds, for example. But this is its own country,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to it becoming a republic when it
Mhm.
stops being underneath the queen, the king now. But
Yeah.
it's
When
it's inevitable.
is there an actual timeline, or is it just a movement that's picking
It's
up
a
steam?
movement. They
Yeah.
voted it down about 20 years ago, and there was a huge, like, kind of upheaval, like, let's do this. And then
Yeah.
it lost all of its momentum.
Mm,
And, it's interesting. I have friends that have worked in the Republic movement, and they've said, oh, when you're a citizen, because I'm going to apply for my citizenship in the next 6 months, they're like, we hope you'll join the Republic movement. I said, I'm sorry, I have a hard time joining anything involving the word
yeah.
Republican. It's just not in my, like, call it the Democratic maybe, but I have to be careful because I can't, the first thing I can't do is overthrow the monarchy
Yeah,
when I get
exactly.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm actually, I feel like this is their business to have. There's one thing you learn in Australia about Aboriginal Australia, and it's
Yeah.
this idea of men's business, women's business, white fella business, black fella business. And it's this idea that this is your problem to solve. It's not our problem to solve for you. And I really respect this concept.
Mm,
Like there's a lot of domestic violence in Australia. It's very troubling to me because it's worse than in the States per capita. And that has been declared men's business. Like men need to solve this. It's
mm,
not a women's job to solve domestic violence. It's a men's business to fix because they're the perpetrator of this violence. So this concept of this monarchy issue as an American and as an immigrant, it's not my business to
Right.
address this. This is for Australians to develop their own kind of response to this, and if they
Yeah.
want to change it, which I do, I do have an appreciation of they it's some of the people have this idea about the monarchy, like they don't want to, they won't be no longer the royal anything, they won't be
Mm,
like the royal flying doctors or the royal,
right.
like it's the regular flying
Yeah.
doctor.
Yeah.
So they like this royal thing, and but it's pretty superficial to base your entire government and system on this title.
That's
But yeah,
so interesting. It's funny because, and I've only lived in the United States. I'm still just shocked at the monarchy. Like I'm just like I like watching it as almost like reality television, but I'm like, we're doing this? Like they're still doing that? Like what?
it's
But I can't
unbelievable.
understand it. Like I understand that I can't understand it. So I love that perspective of like this isn't my business, right? This is cultural and deep-seated. That's really fascinating. And not to go off on a tangent because I want to keep talking about your move and experience and how the family came to and maybe we can talk about this later, but with the Aboriginal people, with the indigenous people, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you were in the United States, you taught social justice and were very involved in equity and inclusion, especially racial equity. And I'm curious about if you see parallels and where there are not intersections. Especially
It's
with, and it's
fascinating.
it's interesting too, as I'm just talking to you about it. I mean, it is the United States is a colonial history and Australia is a colonial history, so we share that.
It's interesting in that, Australia had indigenous peoples here, and there's two main groups. There's Torres Strait Islanders that are kind of on the north, and they have a different cultural heritage than Aboriginal Australians. And so you hear people say, Torres Strait Islander, Aboriginal, or Indigenous, or First Nations. They use
Mm,
those phrases. And thankfully, I have had some terrific individuals, both Torres Strait heritage and Aboriginal heritage, tutor me on all of some of these topics. And they said, look, you're American. We don't expect you to know any of this. We do expect Australians to have
sure,
been, born and raised here, to have a better understanding. So
sure.
they given me a lot of leeway because of that ignorance. But the fact that Aboriginal Australians were considered black stuff, they're, BLAK is how they do it, like Black Lives Matter, BLAK, to differentiate themselves from African Americans or African people. They have both the tragedy of traditional racism. They also have the tragedy of land displacement, like Native Americans. So they're walking around with both of those, horrific experiences. They were not what you call traditionally enslaved, or brought someplace. There's a whole other group of people it was called blackbirding. So people from Tonga, people from Vanuatu, people from Fiji, the Melanesian communities were brought here to basically work in sugarcane fields. They were actually enslaved. So there is slavery here, but it was not of the Aboriginal people historically. Um, and then you have a lot of intermarriage. And so there was this idea that you could breed out the black in a person. There's an excellent movie called Rabbit Proof Fence. I don't know if you've
Yes.
ever seen this film.
Yeah.
It demonstrates this whole concept. And what I find really interesting is a lot of Aboriginal Australians have Irish heritage. I have Irish heritage too. And I was asking, one of the big footy players, his name is Mickey O'Shaughnessy. That's about as Irish as it gets in terms of a name. But
Yeah.
he's Indigenous Australian. So I was asking my friend Brenda, who's Gringy from Northern Territory. I was just like, this Irish thing, like, what's the story there? She goes, oh, Andrea, it makes perfect sense. The Irish hate the British. Aboriginal people hate the British. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I
Yeah.
said, of course. So the
Yeah.
Irish and the Aboriginal, they basically were like, yeah, we don't like them either, because they
Yeah.
had been colonized in
Right.
Ireland, and the potato famine, was a big part of the
Yeah.
British experience, the British invasion of Ireland. So you had this like-minded group. So lots of families have Irish and Aboriginal heritage. But I've learned a lot about in terms of, how they see the world. And Native Americans have similar values because Brenda, my friend who's at Harvard right now, she got a big fancy Australian fellowship. I mean, it's probably the creme de la creme of fellowships, and she was the first Aboriginal woman to get it.
Wow.
Is that so? She's at Harvard, and she's worked a lot with First Nations and Native Americans in the United States, and she finds a lot of kinship in terms of the way they value the land and stewarding of the land and traditional custodianship. If as you treat the land will sustain you and your families, so you can't destroy it or you'll die.
Right.
And I think that's a lesson we all need to learn right now globally. Is First Nations understanding of land not as a commodity but as basically a life force is tremendous. I mean, after the bushfires here, lots of Aboriginal people were like, "Hi, like we told you this 10 years ago. Like we knew that this was going to happen. No one listened to us because we know we've been here 50,000 years. We know the patterns, we know the structures of the world, and it's just it's a paradigm that most Western people can't just organic. I mean, you have to be tutored in this. It's
Yes.
like from the cradle to the grave of this knowledge. It's so deep, and it goes back 50,000 years. Australia has the world's oldest continuing culture. I mean, think about this. The pyramids were built 10 years ago. I'm sorry, 10,000 years ago in
Yeah.
Egypt, and Egyptians couldn't read hieroglyphics. They'd lost it.
Yeah.
There are art paintings that go back 15, 30,000 years, and the people are like, oh yeah, this means this means that, this means water was here, this
Thing.
means, this is the origin stories. So you have this incredible knowledge that it's intact. It's all there.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing. And I saw an interview about one of the Aboriginal communities that encountered Captain Cook, who was killed by Native Hawaiians, I might add, because he was bothering them. But anyway, so Captain Cook showed up and basically killed a guy, and it was a mess. Although he left, and then the first fleet with the convicts came another 15 years later. But what was interesting about that is the Aboriginal guy that was being interviewed, he's our age, like he's living
Yeah.
today. And he was talking about it like it was yesterday. He was like, yeah, and then this guy showed up and he actually killed one of our warriors. And you're thinking to yourself, well, that was 250 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, if your culture is 50,000 years old,
It was yesterday.
250 years ago was yesterday.
Yeah.
Like, he talked about it like it was current. It was amazing. Like the way they think was amazing. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I can tell you a lot more about Aboriginal Australia just because of the tremendous kindness shown to me. And I've done some reading in my homework. I have to. Indigenous Studies was one of my departments at ANU, so I had to know what I was talking about, or
Yeah.
I'd be, I'm just incredibly grateful for the
Yeah.
support that I got.
So you're there. It takes 10 months. When did the family join you?
Well, it's interesting. My son came right away. So he graduated in, spring of 19. So he was a newborn University of Maryland alumnus. Sorry, I got my daughter on the brain. So Drew graduated with, he was a BSOS alumnus, got his geography degree, and basically followed me here. And so he's living here in like a gap year. He has a work permit. Basically can work 20 hours. It's called working holiday. It's like for teenage young people to do things like this. And so he gets a job at a cafe and, learns barista and pizza making and stuff. And he's having a good time. And I'm living in, a small townhouse. And then my daughter's a senior in high school. Homecoming is happening through the fall of 19. My husband's trying to figure out what he's going to do with our house. We've decided to rent it out, but we're going to keep it furnished because we thought we might come back. So he's talking to listen to me, I almost said mates. He's talking to some mates because I'm turning Australian. He's talking to friends about would you want to live here? Look after, we have animals. We thought, well, if we give you a discount, we let the animals live here. So that's working out. He's working on that. He's trying to save money. So I'm supposed to return in June for a month to basically get Meg graduated from high school, June 2020, graduate her from high school, close up the house, rent it out, do whatever. And then we all move permanently in June 2020. That's the plan. Yeah. And so, of course, it went completely sideways.
Yeah.
So then my son's visa expires in May 31st, 2020. So he's going to stay till then, and then he's going to go home. So we'll go home, graduation. He stays, we go back. That was the plan. March 2020 happens. So it's so funny now. So my son's like, hey, mom, he's living in Australia. He's like, hey, mom, this COVID thing, you wouldn't believe the prices to go to Vietnam. I'm going to go. It's only $250 round trip. I'm going to go. And I said, I don't know, Drew, it's a little dangerous to be traveling around with this virus. And he's like, I don't care about a virus. I'll be fine. $250 to go to Vietnam. I'm going. So he books a flight March 2020 to go to Vietnam to visit as a tourist. So then I go to Harvard because we have this longstanding relationship with Harvard, and the United States is in my portfolio, as you might imagine. Yeah. So my boss and I, the dean that hired me, we go to Harvard together for a big lecture, and all hell starts breaking loose at Harvard, and like the sky is falling. This is literally like the 12th, 14th of March, 2020. Yeah. And she goes, Andy, we have to get back. And I said, well, I have to get back because I'm on a temporary visa. They started closing borders at this point. China was closed already. And I said, well, if they close the border, I can't get in. And she goes, I need you. Come, let's go. So we get in an airplane. And I'm terrified that by the time we land, the border will be shut.
Right.
Like slam. So I'm sitting in Dallas to get on my Qantas flight to Canberra. And they're closing borders like all hell is breaking loose. So this is on the 12th of March, 2020. And I called the family and I said, Shell, this is my husband's name, and Meg, my daughter. I said, Meg, if you don't come now, they're going to close the border. Yeah. And she's like, come now? What are you talking about? I said, it's spring break. You're on online high school anyway. Why don't you come here for a couple of weeks and we'll figure it out? Yeah. I'm going to buy you a ticket. I'm on my phone. I bought her a ticket. I said, she's like, I can't go on Saturday. I have the SAT. I said, Meg, pack your stuff. 3:30 on Saturday, the 14th, you're on a plane to Australia. She'd been here before. She'd come when we moved originally. So she's mad. And she's like, what about prom? What about high school? I said, what about my job? I said, tell them you're on the way. They'll understand. She's so mad, furious. And she says, I want to see my friends. What are you talking about? And I said, Shell, what are you doing? She said, I can't leave now. I have my job. I have dogs. I have the house. I can't just walk away right now. She said, he's like, take Meg now. I'll come in a couple of months. We'll get things sorted early. I said, okay. Yeah. So my daughter gets my son. So then my son's in Vietnam during this border shut. He's calling me from Vietnam. He's like, what if they shut the border? What am I going to do? And I said, you're going back to the States. Yeah. You're not coming here. Yeah. So he's trying to get back to Australia. So my son and my daughter both land in Canberra on the 16th. Yeah, because they lost today. They land on the 16th of March. They are now put in quarantine in the house, not in the hotels or anything, in the house. Yeah. Because the quarantine started on the 16th of March. The border shut on the 20th. Oh my God. So 3 days later, border shut. It doesn't open again until December 21. So my husband is now living in the United States by himself, and me and the two kids are in this 2-bedroom apartment in Canberra. I'm on work from home. Lockdown's happening. My daughter is stuck here. She's like, what the heck? I have no friends. I can't leave the house. She turns into a vampire because she has to go to online high school all night because of the time change, and sleeps all day. So I have a vampire in the house. She's up all night. I hear her laughing with her friends. It's crazy. And then my son loses his job because everything closed. So he's like, what am I doing here? I'm going home now. And I'm like, you're not going home now. COVID's going crazy in DC. And so he says, okay, I'll buy my flight. I'll go home in May when my visa's up. So this is March, April, May. He's like stuck in the house with me. So he lands. Meanwhile, we still have residual bushfire smoke and masks. So there's no PPE anywhere. So Drew finally goes home to the States, and I give him a fire mask because that's what we had. So he's wearing a bushfire mask on the plane, and he texts me a photo, and I'm like, okay, keep it on the whole flight. Yeah. So then he lands in the States on, this is, again, I still can't get over this, my son lands in the States on like the 27th of May. His visa expires on the 31st. So he's there within a couple of days of his visa expiring. 24 hours later, George Floyd is killed, is
Uh,
murdered. Black Lives Matter erupts. And my son, because he's African American heritage, him and his partner, and he's down in the protest, and I'm losing my ever-living mind in camera. I'm like, get home, do not
yeah.
go down there. He texts me a photo of him wearing the bushfire mask that I had given him for the flight. He goes, it works for tear gas. I'm good.
Oh my God.
Like, oh.
You're like, why did I raise such a socially conscious child?
He's like, wait, I'm not. He's like, I'm a documentarian. I said, stay out of the fray. I said, people don't
Yeah.
have guns. All my friends in Canberra are terrified for Drew. Terrified. They're like, Drew's down there. Oh my God, because
Yeah.
they know him. And they're all afraid of the United States because of shootings. They're terrified. The average Australian is terrified of the United States because of the guns, and so they're upset about it. They're worried.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's thankfully, my son was part of the movement. I'm proud of him for that. As hard as it was for me, I was very proud of him for that. And he escaped, getting into any real serious trouble. And he ended up getting a good job, and he ended up living in Mount Pleasant, DC, with his partner. They've been together 6 years now. They're Maryland grad. So, they're in good shape and they're very happy. I miss him terribly, but they're good. So basically my husband applied to come to Australia after he got everything sorted with the house and the dog. We did rent it out to two young men, roommates there. And he was declared unessential by the Australian government.
Oh my
It
gosh.
was like, who gets to decide who's essential and who's unessential? Well, he was declared unessential, so he was not allowed in. And he applied twice. At that point, I'm like, don't bother, So the minute the border opened, December 7th, I think, of 2021, he was on a flight like the next day and got here, and it was a grand reunion. And so we hadn't seen each other from January 2020 to December 21. So it's almost 2 full years that we were separated. And, my mother, who lives in upstate New York, I was crying about this. And she said, well, when your dad was in Vietnam during the war, I got one phone call once a year for 3 minutes. So, like no sympathy from her at all.
Right.
And I was like, okay, but it's true with Zoom, Zoom and, FaceTiming. It was hard. The toughest was winter of 2020 in Australia. So that would be June, July, August. So we're on lockdown. It's freezing. We have no idea when this is going to end. That's when things were really looking bad for Black Lives Matter, the election, people were dying, it's surreal. And, when I think about my life, I worked 9/11 in Washington, D.C. in a nonprofit. So I was in the thick of the terrorist attack back in 2001. I have to say the period of that COVID, Trump as president election, my husband far away, my son far away, my daughter miserable. It was got to be probably one of the worst periods of my life because of the uncertainty and being so far away. I almost went home. I came this close. August 2020, I was this close to being like, that's it. I can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
But, my husband was like, do you like Australia? I said, yes. Do you like your job? Yes. Do you have friends there? Yes. Stay the course. I'll get there. And then I was okay. Then I turned the corner and I was okay. But
this is a Shell appreciation podcast. Go Shell. That's awesome.
He's like, what about my adventure? Like, I'm stuck here in Maryland. I'm going to do this Australian thing. He was very fearful that he was going to miss out. And the irony, of course, is he loves it here. My husband is more, like, within hours of arrival, he was talking about good day, mate. It was ridiculous. He loves it here. Well, I have to tell you, African Americans are not treated poorly in Australia. They are considered like there's not that many Americans, period, much less African Americans.
Yeah.
And a couple of people have said, "Oh, I've never met an African American before. Like, do you know Will Smith?" No, I don't know Will Smith. That's a little bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah.
But they really have, like, they think of African Americans, they think of basketball stars, television and movies. They music, rap performers or R&B performers, they don't have any exposure to, the racism that is in the United States.
Yeah.
And so my husband has faced incredible kindness, and he feels that no one's, like he doesn't feel targeted the way he
Mm.
did in the United States. He just has, there's a freedom that he feels here.
Yeah.
And we recognize racism is bad in Australia. It is.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's not targeting African Americans. Like he'll
Right.
talk with his American accent and he's suddenly the coolest guy in the room, which he loves,
Right.
at the gym. They're like, oh, wow, you've been to Vegas? Yeah, I've been to Vegas. Oh, we love to go to Vegas. So he's got this whole cool factor, as being a cool African American guy, and he
Yeah.
loves it. So he doesn't miss home. He's afraid. It's funny because I said, "Oh, you're gonna go home?" He goes, "Well, why would I go home?" And to see your family. And he's like, he's like, I
Oh,
can go
not
to them.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm afraid that if I go there, I can't get back. And I said, Shell, there's not going to be another, COVID
I
thing.
know.
He goes, I don't know. I don't want to go back. He says when he gets his citizenship, he'll feel more comfortable because
Yeah.
when you're a citizen, obviously they have to let you back in.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
and we have permanent residency now. We have our green card. But he still has this, it's irrational. He knows it is. He's like, yeah, I know it's ridiculous, but I just don't want to get stuck on the other side of the border ever again.
Yeah.
So he's not keen to go back. I love going back. I'm the most homesick of the whole family.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
My daughter's like, my life is here. She Mother's Day of 2021 or 22, I think it was 22. She basically forgave me for bringing her here. I'm like, yeah, there was no prom. There was no graduation. It was all online anyway.
yeah.
She's made tons of friends. She got into ANU. She did a
Nice.
degree in archaeology practice and indigenous studies. She's done digs in Vanuatu. She's now a professional archaeologist here in Melbourne. She's working on, there's like a big dig project for trains and things. And so they have to do archaeology reviews at all the digs because they're finding stuff.
Yeah.
They're finding, and so, they're finding not just indigenous artifacts. They're finding like gold rush,
Yeah.
buttons and pottery shards from the colonial days.
Yeah.
Yeah, they find stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So she's enjoying that. She's got her own place and hopes to buy a condo in a couple of years. And
Awesome.
yeah. And yeah. So it's, I love Australia in that everybody has healthcare. We didn't come here for the healthcare, but we'll probably stay here for the healthcare.
Yeah.
It's basically, it's free the way the driving on the roads is free. You pay your taxes and you get it. It's that simple. It's, there are wait lists, and we have, we brought a top off, private insurance top off. That just cuts the line. You can go to see certain people faster, which a lot of people have a problem with, which I kind of do too. You shouldn't have to buy that to get.
Yeah.
But, but fundamentally, nobody dies here of cancer because they can't get treatment. That doesn't exist here. Just doesn't exist. I literally said to, I was talking about somebody in the States about this at ANU, and they were like, Andy, we don't understand this. Like, we understand that, you may not have it fully covered, but like, if you don't have insurance and you have cancer, surely you can get care. I'm like, no, you can't get care. Like, you don't have insurance, you don't get care. They're like, oh, they can't fathom it. So that's been interesting. And then, of course, no guns. We have things like mass stabbings here, which occasionally do happen and are tragic because people can't get a hold of guns.
Right.
They stab people instead. But, all in all, it's a very law-abiding society. It's got, it's got a convict heritage. So there's this idea that, the government is, kind of tells you what to do. And there's like these rules and people follow them. So it's a different... They have freedom, don't get me wrong, but there's just this expectation that the government will take care of you. There's an expectation that you follow the rules. The fines are high. Voting is compulsory here.
Wow.
So my daughter was funny. We were trying to get our citizenship in time for the next election. I said, oh, I want to get my citizenship so I can vote. And she goes, you mean you want to get your citizens, then you must vote. And I was like, oh yeah. I have to vote. I'll get a fine if I don't. So it's serious. The rules here. It's an interesting place. I encourage everyone to come here. It's spectacularly beautiful. It's the size of the United States with less than 10% of the population.
So Australia's the size of the United States?
Physically. Wow. You don't include Alaska. If you just take the continental U.S., it's the same size.
Wow.
But it has less than 10% of the population. It has about 25 million people.
Oh,
which is basically half of New York City
wow.
in an
Yeah.
entire country, or double New York City. I'm sorry, double New York
Yeah.
City in an entire country. And the vast majority, like Sydney has about 5 million people, Melbourne has about 5 million people. So that's half the country live in two cities, and they're world class cities. And
Sure.
then
Yeah.
you have Brisbane. That's where the Olympics are going to be in 32. That's really nice. Then you have Tasmania, which is very southern and very cold. It's opposite. Everything's opposite here. You
Yeah.
want to go into hot weather, you go north. You want cold weather, you go south.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want cold weather, July is the
Yeah.
coldest. January is the hottest. So, you
Yeah.
know, Thanksgiving and how Thanksgiving doesn't exist, but Halloween is in the springtime. So you're trick or treating among the tulips,
Yeah.
and Easter is among the fall foliage.
You have
You're
you've
just
gone through the looking glass. Like,
yeah, it is. It is. Like I still can't get my birthday's in June, so it's in the winter. I have a winter birthday. I said that's it. I'm going home every June so I can have my summer birthday back because I'm
yeah.
not
And
having a winter
June, I
birthday.
mean, June in the Mid-Atlantic, it doesn't get much better. It's
No,
gorgeous.
absolutely.
That's so what else have you been sort of pleasantly surprised with? And what are things that maybe you're homesick for? Like when my sister was in Korea, she lived there for 8 years or so. One of the things I thought was so surprising is she missed Oreos. I know it's just like little weird things that sometimes you're homesick for.
Definitely.
What have you found?
Well, I have to say the best part about Australia, there's a couple of best parts. The best part is that it's so scenic and the animals are everywhere, like kangaroos, koalas, the birds, the trees, the water, everything is pristine. They talk about degradation of their society, of their wildlife and wilderness. Compared to what I'm used to, it
Yeah.
looks immaculate.
Well,
Air is cleaner, water's cleaner, everything's cleaner. The food tastes better.
mhm.
Now, it's not salty enough for my taste. It's not sugary enough for my
Yeah.
taste, and it's not greasy enough. But like to eat like a hamburger, the McDonald's burgers here are amazing because they're Australian beef, and
Yeah.
Australian beef is great.
Yeah.
The lamb chops, the chicken, the fish, all the food is they're highly regulated. There's no corn syrup, doesn't exist. So all the pastries, all the food is just delicious, and it's a very high quality. You can get avocados, watermelon, mangoes, all the fruit and vegetables are amazing. That being said, we miss Fritos. We can get Doritos, but we can't get Fritos. Like we can't get root beer. It doesn't exist here. There's no
Well,
root beer here.
so I don't know if you know this, but Fritos you can light on fire. It's like a camp essential. Like if you have if it rains or whatever, you get that's probably why it's not allowed in Australia. It's like anything that's flammable like
Yeah.
that.
I
But it's
mean,
so good.
yeah, like this friend of mine, she's also American. She's from Oregon. She and I both love this store called USA Foods, and you
Mhm.
can go there and there's all that. It's pure junk food. That's the
Yeah,
only thing they
great.
sell cheese with. They have it all. You can get Oreos here. You
Yeah.
can get Tim Tams, which are now you can get Tim Tams in the States. That's an
Yes, you can.
Australian cookie or cookie. Um, I also miss I don't know what to say. I guess the variety of food at the restaurants, like the Asian food here is excellent. I mean,
Yeah.
it's as good as like West Coast US Asian food, if not better. Like
Yeah.
there's Malaysian and Indonesian food restaurants that specialize in this. There's tons of Asian people here, and they make the real food with real good ingredients. Like there's not like that syrupy, corn
Yeah.
syrupy, like Asian food that you get like in suburban College Park.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so much better.
Not quite China buffet.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's the Asian food. If we go out, we tend to go out for Asian because
Yeah.
every other restaurant has the exact same menu. There's no variety. If you go
Interesting.
to a cafe, you get avo toast, invented in Australia, flat white, invented in Australia.
Right.
You have, eggs on sourdough. They love sourdough bread. They got that from California during the
Yeah.
gold rush days. They have tons of like they eat their eggs poached. My boss went to the United States and that we're at a diner and they were like, "Can we have poached eggs?" And the waitress was like, "No."
No.
That's not this kind of an establishment. But here, everybody does poached eggs.
Huh.
They have porridge, oatmeal. There's
Yeah.
like 8 things on the menu at the
Yeah.
cafe. And then you go to a pub and there's the 8 things on that menu. Chicken parmesan, chicken schnitzel, Scotch fillet, also known as a New York strip steak.
Okay.
They call it Scotch fillet. They also have they'll have a pasta dish. They'll have pizza. I'm trying to think what else they have. Meat pies, upon meat pies, sausage rolls, very British. So if you go into a pub, every now and then you'll get like a gastro pub that will have, if you're very lucky, a Caesar salad. Woo!
Watch
Like,
out.
like oh, exotic. Yeah, they just don't have variety on these menus, and that's what we love about Melbourne. Is Melbourne has a huge variety of food because it's known as the food town. It's a foodie
Mm,
city. So it's Hobart and Tassie. They have a really good fish and seafood down there. But you go to Queensland, the food is, you think the produce is good, but the menus are boring.
yeah.
They're just the same. So that you go to Perth, it's the same as Sydney in terms of the pub menus, exactly the same. You go to
Yeah.
Boston compared to San Diego, totally different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally different. That's the thing about the States. And one Aussie said this to me. She's like, I went to the United States. Every state is different. Every
Yeah.
state has state pride. Every state has its own identity. That's amazing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
thank God, because no state here does that. They're all
Interesting.
pretty much the same. You
Interesting.
go to the Northern Territory, there's a lot more Aboriginal people up there, and so you can get a different vibe
Mhm.
culturally, but the restaurants are basically the same.
Yeah. Americans aren't a monolith, obviously, but like, what would you say Americans maybe get wrong about living abroad or are like you would think are barriers to living abroad? It's interesting what you said earlier about the 2016 election. And I think a lot of people felt that way. I mean, I was living in DC at the time, and it was the first time I ever felt really unsafe, like not from an international incident, from a
Yeah.
domestic incident, which happened. It was the first time I know that I considered leaving, like, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, countries don't want us. Like, and that was a shock to me. I was like, why would you not want an American? And I was like, oh.
Well, there's not that,
But
yeah.
when you haven't explored it, like what have you found either from personal experience or other expats or just sort of you're in that community? What do Americans get wrong about living abroad and any sort of barriers that they experience other than, I think their traditional like work visas?
Well, we're very loud,
Yeah.
and I didn't realize how loud we were until I left and came
Yeah.
back. We scream at each other.
Yeah.
Several Australians have said, "Why do you yell at each other all the time?" I'm like, I don't know. I was in Ireland. I was there on holiday, and there was a table two down from me. Not only were they Americans, they were from Virginia because I heard them
Yeah.
say that. It was took all I could do not to get up, walk over to that table, and to shush them. I'm like, y'all, shush,
Yeah.
too damn loud
Yeah.
because they were screaming. And
Yeah.
I thought, what the hell are we doing this? Why do we do this? We do this.
Yeah.
So I have toned when I get around other Americans, it goes back up.
Of course.
Like me in the house with my husband and daughter,
Yeah.
we're up again. But when I'm at work, it's down.
Yeah.
I had a subordinate, this young Australian woman that worked for me. She was really interested in, she'd never been to the States, so she was asking me about it. And when I first moved here, and then she left, she went to work for another job. And then, we stayed in touch because we were friends. And we got together about 6 months later for coffee. And she goes, oh my gosh, Andrew, you're totally different. I'm like, what? She goes, yeah, like you don't sound anywhere near as loud as you used
Wow.
to. And I was like, ah. And I've had people ask me, where am I from? And I'd say, well, I'm like, hey, can't you tell? And they said, no, we can't. And it was because I had toned it down so
Down. Yeah.
much. I still have an American accent, but it was the
Sure.
loudness and the brashness that I had toned down.
Yeah.
So self-awareness is good for us. Like, take a listen to yourselves. When you're in a European country or an Asian country, or Australian country, quiet down the volume. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not how you talk, it's the loudness.
It's the volume. Yeah.
We're just loud. And the other thing that we get wrong is we think we're the center of the universe. And this has been a hard thing for me to adjust to. So I'm at a meeting at ANU, and it was with a delegation from the EU.
Mhm.
And the EU is they had a Center for European Studies at ANU, and we were talking a lot about Ukraine at the time because it just had happened. And so they were having this broad conversation with the Australian delegation. And I kept waiting for the like, and Joe Biden, blah, 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 and the states, blah, blah, blah. We didn't come up once.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
idea that there would be a comprehensive meeting about Ukraine that didn't include the United States.
Yeah.
Like I was like, where are we? We're not in this today.
Yeah.
Like, like, Shell, my husband, could hardly stand watching the Olympic coverage in Australia. Guess why?
Right.
It was all Australians. We watched more swimming. We're like, swimming? Show us track and field, please. Show us the gymnasts.
Yeah.
They don't show the track and field on the TV. You can get it online, and they don't show the gymnastics. Why? No Australians medal in these sports. Not a single Australian is medaling.
Yeah.
It's wall-to-wall swimming.
Yep.
That's what it is. Because that's what we medal in. We watched the sevens, which is the rugby seven.
Right. Yeah.
Americans won. Americans won this year. Oh, they were so mad. Oh, they were mad. We were like, yeah, Yankees, because we were not used to watching rugby on TV with Americans in it. Anyway, so we were laughing about it. So my husband's like, you call this Olympic coverage? This is horrible. And I'm like, they don't care how many medals the Yanks win. And they don't like the fact that we count all medals, not just gold. That is another bone of contention they don't like. So we're the elephant in the room. We're the big, they're very much concerned about our elections here. It's funny because they love and hate us at the same time. Mm-hmm. They admire us and resent us at the same time. And I had an anti-American slur directed at me, like a nasty one. By accident, I cut a guy off at a gas station, or servo, as they're called here. And I didn't see him. And I just grabbed the pump before he got there. And I said, oh, sorry. So I'm like talking to him. Sorry about that. Like, heard my American accent. He goes, go home, Seppo. And I was like, what is that? So I was called a Seppo, which is an anti-American slur. So I had to Google it.
You're like, joke's on you. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is. So I'm like, I've been insulted, I'm pretty sure. So I Googled it. This is a great story. So during World War II, I love this story. So during World War II, there were a lot of Yanks in Sydney and in Darwin, up in the Northern Territory. They were based out, because this is for the Pacific Theater, tons of Yanks in Australia. Mm-hmm. And all the Australian women loved them because Australian men are not romantic. They don't do flowers. They don't do big romantic gestures. Guess who does?
The Americans.
American men.
Yeah.
They were going over the top with romantic gestures, wooing these women, and all the women were dated and ended up, many of them, marrying the Americans.
Yeah.
And the Australian men were pissed. They were like, what the hell? And so they started calling them septic tank Yank because septic tank rhymes with Yank. Yep. And what is a septic tank? It's full of shit.
Shit, yeah.
So Seppo became the slur for Americans because Americans are full of shit.
Yep.
And you can't help but laugh at that.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
actually hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Because these grand romantic gestures were seen as bullshit. They were full of shit.
That's funny. Wow. That's really funny.
Yeah. So being told go home Seppo was direct. Like if you're affectionate, they'll say Yank. Oh, Andy's a Yank, and I call myself a Yank.
Yeah.
Because if you're British, you're a Pom.
Oh.
If you're from New Zealand, you're a Kiwi. Mm-hmm. So there's Poms, Kiwis, and then Canuck. What's a Canuck? Canadian. So there's all these nicknames for basically, and there's nicknames for everything. But being called a Yank is not an insult. It's just it's your name. You're a Yank. But if you're a Seppo, you're full of shit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But that's the last thing I should say. I know you this is probably winding down, but one of the things that's the most fun about living here is the nicknames for everything. And you find yourself using them. The slang in Australia is next level. You'll never say a service station or a gas station. It's a servo. Afternoon is arvo. Why would you say afternoon when you can just say, I'll see you in the arvo? You say things like brekkie for breakfast, CBD for Central Business District instead of downtown. You say things like Saws for sorry. Like if you step on somebody's toe, you'd say, oh, Saws, instead of
Yeah.
sorry, you'd say, or Tamaz for tomorrow.
Hmm.
There's just tons of them. And you don't even realize you're picking them up until
Right.
you do. And then
Right.
I'll be in the States and I'll say something, and my girlfriends at back home, they're like, why are you talking like that? And I said, talking like what?
Like what?
They're like I said goss once. I said, what's the goss on that? And they were
Yeah.
like, goss. I'm
Yeah.
like, isn't that, we say that, don't we? We say goss. They're like, we don't say that, Andy. We do not say that. I'm like, I'm not sure. I don't know the difference now. Like I forget which is which.
Right.
I still say y'all because I
Yeah.
can't help it. I still obviously sound very American. And some people love it. They say, we love your accent. It sounds
Yeah.
so sweet, because they're not used to it.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing about living in a foreign country is you have to remember that you are a guest in that country. You're really
Yeah.
not there. You're not like your opinions. Like I said, it's Australian business. And that's why I get a little bit mad when people give me strong opinions about the USA election, because I'm like, that's my business.
Right.
Um, I've had some Australians talk trash to me about the American military, and I've said, "Well, you're welcome." This is me
Yeah.
being cheeky. I'm like, "You're welcome," and they're like, "Huh?" And I said, "Who do you think's going to defend your border if y'all get invaded?
Yeah.
Who's protecting your shipping corridors to China and Africa and the Middle East?" I said, "It ain't the Palms.
Yeah.
Y'all get invaded, the British aren't showing up for you.
Yeah.
King Charles comes here during the Women's World Cup and cheers against you. Your own head of state cheers
Yeah.
against you in a soccer match."
Yeah.
I said, my tax dollars are funding all of that, just so you
Yeah.
know.
You're like, my
And
country,
yeah,
tis something.
I know. I start breaking it
Yeah,
out.
exactly.
And
It
and
is
and I have
it is
I'm
interesting
one to
though.
criticize the states that when we deserve it, sure.
Sure, yeah. But that's really interesting. So, what advice would you either give yourself? Don't move during a pandemic, but either give to yourself or give to someone who's listening and is interested in moving abroad. What advice?
I mean, I was very fortunate. I was sponsored by the ANU, so I had all my legal fees paid. I did pay for my daughter and my husband's visas. They did not include that,
Mhm.
which
Sure.
was not cheap. It was 10 grand. It was 5 grand each to get them PR, permanent
Yeah.
residency visas. But everything for me was sponsored. So look at your industry. Who in your industry exists abroad. I mean, philanthropy is a huge growth area internationally.
Yeah.
Basically, everybody wants money. And I have to say, when I was interviewing at ANU, they had looked in the DC area because Canberra was a national capital, and they wanted people who understood the life of a national capital. And so during the interview, they'd be like, well, we're the national capital. We're different. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm from a national capital. I know. And
I
it
get
was
it.
so true. National capital to national capital. So if you're working in New York City in finance, like look where big finance is.
Yeah.
London, Tokyo, the places where this business is. Universities are global, so that's always good. I definitely think, nursing, social work, helping professions, there's tons of need all around the world for these
Yeah.
fields. I told a woman in the States, she was a nurse, and I was at an urgent care clinic, and she was like, wow, you live in Australia? How did you do that? And I said, well, I got a job there. I said, you're a nurse. You could get one. And you're under 30. She was like 28. I said, you could walk in Australia tomorrow because
Yeah.
you're a nurse from an English speaking country. If you were a garbage man, no, probably not. But if
Right.
you are in a field that is in demand,
Right.
you can do it. And it also depends on how far do you want to be from your family. I mean, as tragic as it is of the COVID situation, I still can go home now, but
Right.
it's 20 hours. That didn't change. It's like if some tragedy happens, I'm looking at $3,000 and 20 hours to get
Right.
home. Now, the best part about Australia is they don't care if you take a month off.
Yeah.
Like you can take 4 weeks off is normal. People take long vacations here because they have to go
Yeah.
anywhere. It's normalized. I mean, it's just completely normal that people go. Basically, the month of January, they leave. They
That's
go to
amazing.
Europe in July, and they go to Bali or the coast for Jan. It's completely normal. The work-life balance, like nobody works more than 37 and a half hours. They have a right to disconnect law here. Can you
Love that.
imagine this?
Love it.
My boss, the dean, could not was prohibited to email coworkers or staff, her staff, after 5 o'clock,
Wow.
unless it was an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if they do, they have to tell you, like, if you're on call, like, let's say you're in a medical setting or something like that, you have to be designated on call and you get like a differential for that status. But
Wow.
like the vast majority, like 5 o'clock email stops,
Yeah.
weekends, nothing. Like, it's just unheard of.
Huh. What's that like?
It's unbelievable. But here's the
Yeah.
flip side. Everything takes forever.
Ever. Yeah.
Everything. I mean, like, it was very funny. A coworker of mine, he's American. He's in Sydney, and he said that he hired an American to come and work for him. He's in philanthropy too, and she would email responses within an hour. Like, whoa,
Whoa.
it's
Yeah.
completely normal for a week to go by to get an email response.
Wow.
Completely normal.
Wow.
Yeah, the idea that you would email within an hour, unheard of, unless it's urgent. Like and then they would
But
call
sure.
you. You know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a different pace. But look at your industry, decide how much, like, I wasn't planning to live here forever. I had planned to come here until Trump went away, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I fell in love with the country. The people are really nice. I mean, I've made lifelong friends. I mean,
Yeah.
and my daughter's not moving back.
Yeah.
Her life is here, and so I'll never be settled. Like, when I'm in Australia, I miss Maryland or home.
Yeah.
When I'm in Maryland, I'm like thinking, like, something came on TV with Australia, and I'm like, there's Canberra, there's this. And I'm thinking, who am I? Like, I'm not settled either place. And that will never leave me. I don't think I've changed. Some people say I talk funnier now because of my phrases, or like I will say this, occasionally something will gobsmack me in the States. I'm like, how is this okay? Like,
Yeah.
guns or healthcare.
Yeah.
Like, how do we allow this?
Yeah.
I'll eat some food, or I'll see some food, and I'm like, this is pure shit. Like, why do we serve this?
Yeah.
This is so bad. Or something will happen in Australia, and like a tradie. That's a work person, like someone that comes to a tradesperson. It's called a tradie. Like, a tradie will be scheduled to come and do a maintenance job at your house, but the sun's shining and it's 25 degrees. That's Celsius.
Yeah.
Go surfing. They're like, they just don't show up. Like, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
That's normal here. Like,
Yeah.
I'll be like, Australia, there you go.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's one of those things that I never dreamed I'd live here permanently. I never even aspired to live in a foreign country.
Yeah.
That was never on my to-do list. And yet that's why I call myself the accidental expat, because I thought I never dreamed it would be. And here I am. And yeah, it's surreal occasionally. Like, my daughter and I will be driving down the interstate, or on the side of the building would be the country of Australia, and it'll say, "We serve coast to coast," and it's Australia. It's not the United States.
Yeah.
And we'll be like,
what?
What? Like, what are we doing here?
Like, we live here. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
So that does happen.
That's very cool.
Anyway, thanks, Megan. I could keep going because I
oh
love
my gosh,
talking
thank
in
you.
general.
This was so fun. First of all, like, personally, it was so fun that we get to catch up. But just really fascinating perspective. And then how can people find you? Whether where the organization you work for, or do you have like a blog or anything? Like,
it's interesting. I've worked a lot with literature at ANU, and I've met a lot of authors in my career. And a couple of people have said, "When's your book coming out?" And I'm like, I don't have a book in me. Lots of people think they have a book in them. I don't think I have a book in me. What I have in me is lifelong friendships and conversations. I'm a talker, not a writer. And I would highly encourage anyone who's interested in following up. They could certainly email me at Andrea, Eliz, formerly known as Z, Eliz Morris, Morris, at gmail.com. And certainly I'm on LinkedIn, Andrea Morris. And, I'm one of those people that, I enjoy hosting guests. Like, if someone wants to come here and wants a tour, I'll be happy to do it. I was one of the ways I was really having a ball at ANU. Like, we'd have American dignitaries coming into Canberra because it was national capital, like, to ANU, or they were at the American Embassy, or they were doing research at the National Gallery or National Archives of Australia. And they'd say, "Oh, we know this American lady, Andrea. She'll give you a tour." And they cold call me, like, "This lady's here." she wants to say hi. And I'm like, I'll take them around. So I would get in the car and drive them around because they were afraid to drive. Of course
Yeah.
they were. They're on the wrong side of the road. And I can drive on the wrong. I'm ambidextrous in a car now, so it's no big
Yeah.
deal. So I would show them around, and I have made great friends that way. They're like, well, if you're ever, Dubuque, Iowa, give us a call. Or if you're ever in Berkeley, Cali,
Yeah.
come give us a call. And I'm like, don't invite me. I will show up.
Yeah. I'll tell you, and anybody listening, if you invite me or say like we should get together, it might be in 5 years. You're getting a text from me. So, but it's wonderful. I love what you just said about like, you may not have a book in you, but you have these amazing life experiences. And that's what life's about. It's living it. So, and you certainly have. So this has been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And if I inspire people to, get out of their comfort zone, go to a foreign country, even as on holiday,
Yeah.
One of my favorite humorists, Mark Twain, travel is fatal to bigotry. And that's so true. When you get out of your own environment, whether it be temporarily or permanently, you can't look at the world in the same way.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I have a greater appreciation of the United States having left. And I also have lots of what you call stern feedback for the place having left, and that's what will happen to anyone that takes a journey like this.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Wonderful. Well,
Megan, when are you coming to Oz with your kids?
Let me tell you something. I'm like ready to go. It's amazing.
It's expensive to get here. It's not expensive to be here because of the American dollar is more powerful.
Yeah. Well, we should when we can take a month off. I'm looking over because my daughter's in my room. When we can take a month off, I feel like we're headed there. So this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.